Welcome to ESI Africa Insights. For this episode, I am speaking with Kirsty Carden, who is the Director for the Future Water Research at the University of Cape Town. Welcome to the studio, Kirsty.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to start off with looking at, in terms of access to water and nature-based solutions, how do you balance ecological functionality with community needs? I think this is a complicated universe.
Absolutely. And I think it requires a nuanced understanding of the different requirements for communities, where they are based, how much they are able to contribute into the provision of nature-based solutions. The sort of planning and engagement of stakeholders becomes really important. So usually we do it in three ways. We start with trying to identify what the key ecological functions are that we are trying to protect in these areas through nature-based solutions. And those could be things like water purification alongside rivers. It could be access to water through stormwater provision, that type of thing, urban green infrastructure, rain gardens, permeable pavements that contribute. But then it's also very clear indication required of what the community needs are. And obviously those community needs will change across different income strata, across different contexts. So what are their priorities? And that could include access to water, but it might also include protection of the environment, or providing a healthy environment, or even things like amenity provision or livelihood provision. So how do you balance that, the need for a nature-based approach with the whatever services they are already able to access? And then lastly, how do you bring those both together? So what type of strategies do you put in place to ensure that you know what the priorities of a community are? And that's obviously through proper stakeholder engagement, through co-creation, through designing with residents. Maybe it's things like taking into account indigenous knowledge systems, particularly in areas where it may not be as urban as others, and people are used to actually making use of nature-based solutions. So actually encouraging them to continue. And then, land use planning, thinking about ecological health, all of those things become tools to bring it together.
Mm-hmm. I think the most difficult there would be looking at what are the future possibilities and how do you build that into the design of the solution.
Exactly. What do we want to do in terms of imposing stewardship functions or management functions on people who may not be able to do that? So in a wealthy neighborhood, for example, the ability to self-organize into friends of groups or NGOs that tackle the type of maintenance and management of nature-based solutions becomes a lot easier than in an informal settlement or a very disenfranchised neighborhood where people are really battling to put food on the table. So, yeah.
So in your experience, what are the key policy enablers or barriers to integrating sustainable water practices into urban planning frameworks?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to have an integrated urban planning framework in place, because often municipalities, local governments, water services authority operate in silos, which of course is one of the barriers. How can you manage a water system that is integrated, an urban water cycle, while you are trying to do that in different departments that don't necessarily talk to one another? So, for example, stormwater management is often done through roads and transport departments because stormwater is a hazard on roads and they want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. But if we want to integrate that through green infrastructure or through nature-based solutions into a supply system or into greening a city or those sort of things, then you can't manage it in a separate department. So that's the first thing. The second is allowing those clear mandates across the different departments. So having governance and institutional structures that actually talk to one another. Thirdly, I think, is around incentives. And many municipalities are now beginning to recognize the fact that we can't carry on business as usual with water management. So there does need to be some shift or paradigm change into doing things differently. And in order to do that, you have to provide incentives through policy to get developers, residents, industry to actually start putting in place these different and new ways of doing things. So that is one thing. And then I guess it's the policy around public-private partnerships. How do we bring in alternative financing mechanisms to ensure, firstly, that those residents, those sort of lower income residents, can get supported through the stewardship actions, but also that the municipalities can consider doing things in a different way. Yeah.
That's all very good information that you have shared there, especially around the fact that we're working in silos and we absolutely need to collaborate in terms of our water resources. So what kinds of data and indicators are most critical to tracking a city's progress towards climate resilience and water conservation?
Yeah, so I think, it's two separate things. If you want to track climate resilience, you've got to look at again, sort of a number of different things. You want to look at the climate data itself, tracking trends in things like rainfall, in temperature change, and trying to understand the historical trends around climate, whether there have been increased numbers of hazards, flooding events, drought events, that sort of thing. But you also need to understand the resilience of the infrastructure that is already in place. So are there key infrastructure spaces that are climate proofed, for example? And that could be through enabling less reliance on water from a municipal system, actually bringing things into their own systems, being much more resilient to those vagaries of climate. And then, of course, some of the other indicators are around social vulnerability. So how do people respond to these different hazards? How many hazards have there been? And what is the disaster preparedness of those different forms of hazards? So that's sort of on the climate resilience side. Then on the water conservation side, it's more around access. It's around amount of water that people use, trying to understand different contexts and why we use different volumes of water, what the percentage of non-revenue water is, how much is lost to leaks is a very big problem in terms of sort of overall access. Things like the reuse of wastewater. Can we bring that into the system? What is the percentage of green areas in cities? So all of these things, there are a number of indicators and data that can be collected to really encourage a sort of cross-disciplinary and new way of thinking. And then tools to also to consider this data. So things like bringing in GIS and remote sensing, thinking about citizen science, so asking residents of areas to do the monitoring of water quality and flood preparedness, and that sort of thing becomes important in this space.
That's a very interesting uses of data and how to collect that data.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kirsty, for sharing that with us.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you for watching. Tune in for the next episode of ESI Africa Insights and have a water secure day.